I'd like to welcome everyone to the Gold Institute's event today on Wednesday, January 3rd, titled Assessing the Impact of Bangladesh's Upcoming Elections on South Asian Geopolitics and Security. As everyone who's joining us here today is aware, the very historic general elections are set to take place in Dhaka, Bangladesh, on the 7th of this month in just 4 days. And today's timely event is going to really focus on delving into the significant implications of Bangladesh's impending elections, which are really a critical juncture with far-reaching effects and impact on the geopolitical security and security framework, frankly, of South Asia as a whole. So what happens in Bangladesh is not only affecting what occurs there, but also in neighboring countries, India, Sri Lanka, many others, and in the West, in countries like the United States and throughout Europe. Today's panel features a distinguished panel of experts, including leading members of Bangladesh's civil society, renowned thinkers, journalists from influential think tank community in Washington, D.C. and in Europe, and promise to offer an insightful perspective, a series of insightful perspectives on this unfolding political scenario, frankly, and security scenario. Of course, as everyone is familiar, there is in the backdrop tension, severe political tension with the Bangladesh National Party, the BNP, boycotting the elections, and reports of violence from various political factions, including Jamaat al-Islami. And I'm just going to ask that everyone, if they could mute themselves, who is in the audience. Perfect. So, of course, there's been a lot of attention and focus on this election. I'd say probably more so than in the last election, which was 5 years ago, and for very good reason. With the boycotts, with the efforts to secure Bangladesh, we've seen the current leadership through the Awami League, bolstered by the leadership of Prime Minister Hasina, which has made a very, very concerted effort towards also countering radicalism and terrorism within Bangladesh's borders and by extension the broader region. Today's event, of course, is poised to provide a deep understanding of the intersection between electoral politics and regional security in South Asia. With that, I am really pleased to introduce you to our esteemed panel of guests today, which includes Mr. Honorary Geoffrey Van Orden, who is a senior fellow at the Gold Institute for International Strategy, Mr. Syed Ishtiaque Reza, who is the editor-in-chief of Global TV, Dr. Imtiaz Ahmed, who is a professor at the University of Dhaka, Mr. Neil McCabe, who's also a media fellow at the Gold Institute for International Strategy, Mr. Sanjay Kumar, who is a foreign policy analyst based in New Delhi for several publications as well. And I would like to start out with jumping in to this event with a few questions. I think Mr. Kumar, actually what I'll do is I'm going to go to Mr. Ahmed first, since you are on the ground in Dhaka currently. I wanted to really just have you, if you could elaborate on what you've been seeing. Of course, many Bangladeshis that I've personally spoken to, both on the ground in Bangladesh, in Europe, in the United States, and other countries, they've really expressed apprehension and worry about, let's say, a potential rise of the opposition. I'm curious to know, after seeing everything that's occurred, to what extent do you believe that Bangladesh's development, of course, with the focus on 2041, Vision 2041, particularly under Sheikh Hasina's, Prime Minister Hasina's leadership, what do you think Bangladesh's development progress could be like if, let's say, the Awami League were not to maintain power in the current days, and how might their governance, contrast with the current trajectory compared to other parties that may have, let's say, a different perspective on the country's development.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Adelle, for giving me this opportunity. Let me start by saying that, I have to differ from the many Bangladeshis that you have spoken to. And let me highlight why that is so by focusing on four factors. The first one is Bangladesh never had political stability since its birth. What Bangladesh had for the first time since 2019 is regime stability. And I want to distinguish the two. Now, whether the regime stability would hold and contribute to political stability is something we have to wait and see. But to be honest, we never had political stability, and there are countries in the world which really doesn't have political stability, but that did not stop their development process because they had regime stability. The second one is our history. If we focus on our history, it is if there are any significant political changes, it has always been through mass protests of millions of people coming out on the streets, and that not only in the Dhaka city but throughout Bangladesh. That is, when millions of people come on the streets and bring the economy to a halt, then the stakeholders sit together and they try to decide what to do and change things. But I'm afraid so far the opposition parties have failed to attract millions of people to come out on the streets, and more so after 28th October, when the campaign seems to have fizzled out. And this brings me to the third factor. Bangladesh has entered what could be referred to as the politics of mega identities. There is zero trust among major political parties, and there are good reasons for this. Each platforms, they hold contradictory positions on the 1971 Liberation War, on 1971 genocide, the father of the nation, the brutal killing on 15th August 1975, and on top of this, the 21st August 2004 grenade attack on the then opposition leader, now Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. Now, trust between major political parties is the minimum precondition required for holding national elections under the Westminster system. I'm afraid that after the 21st August 2004 grenade attack on the opposition leader and now Prime Minister, such trust has gone down to zero. And this brings me to the final, my final view on the question that you have raised. Some critics contend that there is a leadership issue in BNP. Since the top two leaders from the same family cannot participate in the national elections because of their legal convictions, they are least interested in creating a third leader outside the family. So the BNP campaign since 2018 has always been to free the top two leaders. Now, how will they resolve this issue of leadership remains an open question. So their coming to power remains far-fetched at this stage. But from a hypothetical standpoint, and to follow up on to the question that you have raised, that if these parties were to come to power, I would say they would face insurmountable difficulties regionally as well as globally. And the reason I say this, let me limit that also into three. First, their connection with Jamaat-e-Islam would make the people of the United States, for instance, apprehensive of the outcome, given the reputation the Jamaat has historically. Secondly, their coming to power would also, and this is BNP's coming to power, would also go against India's interest, as it would remind India the role that the government played or the state played with the insurgent groups of Northeast India when they were in power. Don't forget, this particular regime has really, given India the kind of assurance and has brought down to a zero level where India finds very comfortable, particularly when it's related to the Northeast India. And the final thing is, I guess BNP believed the Biden administration, salvaging their concern too much, and even siding with the administrations, imposing visa restrictions and sanctions. I think by doing that, they alienated a substantial section of people, particularly the business people in Bangladesh, because there's a big business between Bangladesh and the United States. So my last words is this: if the regime stability can hold, Bangladesh will be able to attract investments, and the United States too can benefit from what is considered as one of the fastest growing economies in the world. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I just want to clarify a few points before we go to Syed, Ishtiaque, Reza for a response to that. As far as I know, and I could be wrong about this, but I believe that the vocalization of implementing sanctions on Bangladeshi nationals hasn't actually been carried through. So I think that it was more of a vocalization of it. I don't believe it's actually been administered, typical. And regarding what you've said, very astute comments and observations regarding the need for opposition parties, a burgeoning democracy. And from what I've seen, I've observed a truly democratic aspiration and really attempts to allow for the free and fair open elections, which I've seen the administration call for anyone to be able to participate in those elections. Of course, the BNP has been boycotting it, very politically motivated, of course. So I think that what we can deduce from this is I kind of see a Thatcher-like or MBS-like leadership from Prime Minister Hasina with a very democratic purview, believe it or not, very similar to what the United States was when it first started out. And so with that said, I'd love to now, thank you so much, get a response from Mr. Reza as well, from on the ground as well in Dhaka, like yourself.
Thank you very much. I think Dr. Imtiaz rightly talked about the regime stability in Bangladesh. As he said, Bangladesh had actually never witnessed any political stability since the killing of father of the nation, Bangabandhu, in 1975. What you need to know about the context in Bangladesh. The latest context, I would say, the grenade attack on the leader of the opposition on 21st August 2004. That incident actually divided Bangladesh politics forever, and there is no trust, no confidence on the opposition side from the ruling side here in Bangladesh. And if you look at the 2001 election, Mr. Imtiaz will also agree with me, hopefully. Immediately after the 2001 elections result, Bangladesh witnessed months-long attacks against the minority communities. Hundreds of homes of the minority people, particularly of the Hindu community, were burned. Hundreds of girls were raped across the country, and militancy rose to the level of Afghanistan or Pakistan in Bangladesh. And it was a dark time when any liberal, any secular person were feeling insecure in the Bangladesh soil. So the 2001 election up to 2006 and the gap of 2 years by the caretaker government backed the army and the following the election in 2008. If you look at the subsequent period, two things actually happened in Bangladesh. One is militancy dropped drastically during this period over the last 15 years, although there were attempts here by the militant people. But you can talk about the major course correction to reflect the true democracy in Bangladesh. But I believe democracy is actually contextual. You can never think of Westminster system being practiced everywhere, particularly with huge population, extreme poverty, and serious enmity of political parties in a soil of just 55,000 square miles. So this is the real reality here, and Bangladesh is now facing the real challenge in also the opportunity. That is, the opportunity is governance, challenge is governance. Opportunity is governance in that sense. Bangladesh has developed a lot. Now thinking about the stability to attract the foreign investment, as well as bringing governance in the banking sector, financial sector, bringing stability in the money market, particularly the capital market. But also there are challenges from the Awami League itself, because Awami League is in power for the last 3 consecutive terms, and there is no real opposition here. So this is the election on 7 is creating a point where challenge and opportunity mixed in the real context for Sheikh Hasina, and which is also a context for India as well as the South Asian countries, because under Sheikh Hasina government, India found a partner to keep Pakistan's plan to destabilize the region at bay, and various insurgency groups in Northeast that found havens across the border were rooted out during this period. So Bangladesh stability, regime stability, or the government stability mean stability here to continue the development process, stability here in the South Asian region to defeat the militancy, because Pakistan and Afghanistan both are very big inspiration for the militant people here in Bangladesh, and that militant group is actually nurtured by BNP and Jamaat Islami politically in this soil.
Thank you so much for your wonderful response as well. I just want to point out, you made some very, very important, of course, statements. The foremost being every challenge presents opportunity, right? You can never have growth or advancement without having challenges on a personal level and on a grand level, which of course Bangladesh is a wonderful study case for this. And of course, as you pointed out, for anyone who's here who isn't familiar with it, the 1971 events, which constituted a genocide and which has been recognized by the current government of Bangladesh as a genocide, has been addressed, and the US is also in the process of addressing that. And of course, there was a heavy involvement by Pakistan's ISI in that 71 event. And as you mentioned also, Dr. Reza, in currently with the opposition forces, there are elements of that are fanning the flames of these oppositions that are carrying out violent crimes against civil society and against official government entities. So I think that from what I've seen, there's been a lot of effort to counter those extremist factions within the nation and secure the borders. That said, I want to take a little bit of a shift over to a bit of a different subject, which is also related actually to national security matters and issues. It has to do with, frankly, crises exist in so many countries. You have, unfortunately, so many nations that are torn by war. There's 2 wars happening currently in Europe, of course, between in the Ukraine crisis, between Russia and the US, of course, and in the Middle East, Israel and Gaza. And we have to look at the Syrian crisis as well. And just when examining, the plight of refugees, this is for Moderator Geoffrey Van Orden, when examining the plight of refugees, particularly those from war-torn regions, we kind of have seen a disparity in how these host countries have, approached their resettlement. And I kind of want to talk to you about this because you do have some experience with the observing and covering this as well in your speeches. Bangladesh has seen a massive insurgence of Rohingya refugees due to what's happening in Myanmar, which is a national security also issue. But from what I've personally seen, and of course, the 2 gentlemen here from Bangladesh can also attest to that, and also Sanjay, because you've seen it yourself, Bangladesh has been a very wonderful host in terms of taking them in, Cox's Bazar, Basan Char, and providing them ways to resettle and integrate into society there. What would you say is the national security, I guess, implication of not having integrated refugees in such a positive way as Bangladesh has been able to achieve and accomplish. What would you say is your assessment of how Bangladesh has been handling that, which does have reverberations for the rest of the country and, of course, neighboring India, for example? If you could speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, sure.
Is it for Mr. Geoffrey? Okay.
Sure. I'd love for Geoffrey, for you to begin. Then, if
okay.
I'd love that.
I think all the countries in the region, of course, are very sensitive about their borders and about the movement of populations. Sheikh Hasina, of course, got a lot of international acclamation for her welcoming the Rohingya refugees into Bangladesh. But of course, there's now been criticism because of the point that you make, that there's been a, if you like, a lack of opportunity for integration. The Bangladesh government, of course, has taken the position that these people are temporarily in Bangladesh and that they've provided them with shelter and protection for a limited period until they can return to Myanmar. That's the position that Sheikh Hasina's government has taken. It's also the position that many other governments have taken in the region, not least India. India's been very supportive of that particular policy. So they're not really regarded as refugees requiring integration. They're required as, they're seen as displaced persons who will return to the country that they came from. And I think there is a degree of movement on this already taking place. The problem is, because this has now gone on for a number of years, the conditions in those refugee areas are, of course, increasingly desperate. And we've seen the rise of a number of extremist groups within the refugee population, the Rohingya population. That in itself presents a potential threat. And of course, it also weakens any willingness on the part of the Myanmar government to have people coming back into Myanmar, because that's the last thing that they want. Complicating issue there, of course, is amongst those various extremist groups. Well, you've got many. You've got, of course, the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, ARSA, which is the sort of dominant group. But there are a lot of other and perhaps even more extremist groups amongst the Rohingya population. So I think the growth of extremism, the ability of external groups like Al-Qaeda or ISIS to exploit these opportunities is a matter of concern. So the sooner that the international community can help repatriate, if you like, the Rohingya, then so much the better. And I think that is going to be the way ahead.
Thank you so much for that. I'd love to get Mr. Reza to also respond. The thing that I've been seeing is, frankly, the Western media, and the US in particular, having actually been on the ground there, and a colleague of mine there on the ground physically, there have been a little bit of disproportionate and misrepresentation, frankly, as with regard to how the crisis has been handled. And there is, I've seen personally, a difference in the way that these Rohingyans have been welcomed, where they have been given the opportunity to actually be trained for jobs, to have opportunities to gain income for their families. They have access to, nourishment. I think that, of course, how do you say, show me the man and I'll show you the crime, in a sense? A lot of the Western media has, and you know this well yourself, Geoffrey, that they'll go in, they'll want, if it bleeds, it leads. It's the most, negative kind of extreme thing that will garner the best headlines. Myself being a former journalist, Sanjay yourself currently, Syed, Ishtiaque, Neil yourself. So that's another part of it. And of course, nothing is perfect, but I've noticed a much better, I think, situation on the ground in these camps than in other parts of the world. And I do agree that it is best for no refugees want to leave their country for good. The goal is always to go back to where they came from in a more stable and secure environment. And so it is my hope that that can become a reality for those who do wish to do so. That said, I'd love to also have you, Syed, Reza, to please give a response to what you've also witnessed and seen in your country, in those regions in particular. If you could unmute yourself.
Rohingya crisis, are you hearing me? Yeah. Okay. Rohingya crisis, you can say a ticking bomb for the region and of course for Bangladesh. If you look at the Rohingya camps, definitely Bangladesh had to swallow the crisis, no other alternative, because the persecution going on in Myanmar and the ethnic cleansing by the military in Myanmar. Bangladesh, being the closest neighbor, had no other alternative but to accept the people here. And being a densely populated country, Bangladesh had accepted this huge population because on the humanitarian grounds. But now the reality Bangladesh is facing is very serious. First of all, you need to feed this huge population. Second, there are threats of regional stability because persecuted people sometimes become very militant. And around 400,000 Rohingya children being homeless and growing up in the camps without education, with hatred in their hearts. And many of them had seen that their mothers were violated in front of them in the Rakhine state. So you see a huge children group, they are growing with severe hatreds in their mind. Now they're taking to growing and they are able to take the revenge. So this is a very big crisis here. And Rohingya people, they themselves, as they are as they face the atrocities there. So there is this regional crisis as well as Bangladesh, for a crisis for Bangladesh. I don't know how this can be addressed, but there is a real crisis, real threat for regional security stability in the South Asian region.
Thank you so much. I actually have, in response to that, I want to now speak with the regional stability issue with Mr. Sanjay Kumar. India has always been a mirror to South Asia. I wanted to know from you, based on your experience in covering Bangladesh and obviously India, how the ascendance of majoritarian politics in India, there's an upcoming election this April, I believe, for also Prime Minister Narendra Modi. How is that in India impacting the political discourse in Bangladesh? And how does it impact the secular politics of the so-called riverine state?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And, and that's a fact. India acts as a mirror to the whole of South Asia. The very fact that Bangladesh modeled itself as a secular democracy, as a secular country, Bangladesh's slogan when it was seeking independence from Pakistan was, "We are Bengali first, Muslim second." This was the slogan, and they are very proud of their secular tradition. But the current reality is that India, which used to act as a role model in South Asia, is turning majoritarian. And that's really impacting Bangladesh in a big way, being a next door neighbor. Despite the proximity between the political leadership in both the countries, Sheikh Hasina and Prime Minister Modi in India, the fact remains that Sheikh Hasina today in Dhaka is in a very uncomfortable position, the way India is shaping itself politically. Because the discourse in India, the political discourse in India, and the rise of Hindu majoritarianism in this country after Prime Minister Modi's ascension to power in 2014 has impacted, the political scene in Bangladesh. So you have more, instead of people choosing being secular, there are now the India's instance, India's turn towards majoritarianism is turning a section of the population in Bangladesh more radical, more Islamist, and that endangers the secular polity of that nation. It's a truth now that the Hindu minority, which used to be in large number in Bangladesh not long ago, today is just 8% of the population, and they are on the edge. They are the most vulnerable population in Bangladesh today. The reason being not the polity in Bangladesh, the reason being that India's politics is impacting their livelihood, their security in Bangladesh, and which Sheikh Hasina won't say so openly, but you talk to the civil society and other members of the political, other members in Bangladesh, it's a reality. And this worries like, and also the way Indian politics is shaping. Sheikh Hasina is also modeling herself that way, because there is, besides the rise of the majoritarianism in India, you have also the democracy deficit in India. Gradually, India is becoming is less democratic nation than it was, say, a decade ago. And this, I feel that this is also impacting Sheikh Hasina, and she is also following that model. So Bangladesh, I feel, is facing a crisis, of course, because there's there is a democracy deficit there, because there is no understanding between the two major political parties. But at the same time, India's turn towards majoritarianism is really pushing this nascent state into an edge.
Thank you for your input. I have to say I've been to, much like yourselves, several countries in South Asia, in the Caucasus, and other nations, and I have to say, based on first of all, there's a common fallacy where people say this is a model of democracy. The United States, for example, for anyone who's, of course, I myself was born and raised there, isn't really a democracy, it's a republic. And so I think the concept of this great experiment and we can talk about that, of democracy, is truly something that it can be discussed and debated. And so is there truly a role model for democracy? That's a great question that we should pose. But I have to say, based on what I've seen, of course, every country has an issue with its majority populations, depending on numbers. But I think that based on what I've seen, Bangladesh has been doing a very good job in terms of working towards securing the rights of the minority population and working towards ensuring that. I think the step to recognize, for example, the 1971 genocide was a very massive step in the right direction for that. And I think that it's actions like those that set the precedents for example, when there's Diwali or other Hindu holidays in Bangladeshi civil society, from what I understand, they are celebrated just equally by everyone in civil society. And so the same for Christians and other minority faiths. I do hope to continue seeing that grow and prosper. But thank you so much, Sanjay Kumar, for your great answer also regarding India. It's something we're all going to be watching very closely. And for our next event, also assessing the elections there, we'd love to have you on again, of course. With that said, I'd like to now take a turn regarding national security. Neil, you've done a lot of work as well. Before I go back to the security issue also regarding with Geoffrey, there's been a lot of work you've done, of course, in your formidable journalistic career as well, covering topics of national security interest, both in the US and on a regional level. You are yourself a member of the right? The U.S. military, as a reservist, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm an Army Reserve Sergeant First Class, working in public affairs. I deployed to Iraq for 15 months as a combat historian, and I also spent 10 months in Kuwait, which was supposed to be a nice, quiet tour in the desert, which culminated with the fall of Kabul, and so I was at Camp Arifjan, which is the operational hub for a central command in the Middle East, and so I got kind of a front row seat to that debacle. So yes, and as a journalist, you and I work together as journalists. Journalists, as a rule, are some of the most loathsome people I've ever met. Not as loathsome as poets, but very loathsome. But you've never been loathsome, Adelle, and I appreciate you inviting me to this forum, and it's been fascinating so far.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yeah, unfortunately, journalism has taken a turn for the worst, I feel, where it's become activism, and finding objective analyses is increasingly rare these days. But I'm very glad that there are people out there like ourselves who are doing our best to make sure that the truth of
the journalist today wants to be a participant instead of an observer. And they make themselves players in the project. They make themselves partisans. They brag about this. But you talk about Bangladesh in terms of national security. Let's just talk about where it places in the world. It has a very serious military. There's a very serious navy. It sits close to some of the most important trade routes in the world as those ships make their way from East Asia, around Indonesia and going right past India onto the Suez Canal and whatnot. So it's hard to ignore Bangladesh, and you can see how there are forces in the world that want to create or perpetuate instability. I guess it depends on what your perspective is. Some people, has there been stability or not? But certainly there are forces that want instability in Bangladesh to serve the purposes of other players. And I think that number one is Pakistan, and I think that Pakistan is China. I think it just makes it a lot easier to so when we talk about China and we talk about Pakistan, we're talking about the same forces. And I think that in the last 5 years, we especially saw this in the Trump administration, though it was starting under Obama. What we used to call the Pacific Theater is now called the Indo-Pacific Theater, because military strategists in the United States recognize that India and the subcontinent are a very important counterweight to the influence of China, and certainly Pakistan is key to that. A destabilized or chaotic Bangladesh really is going to spread. So we talked a little while ago about the political influence or the cultural influence of majoritarianism in India. Well, they're also, that goes both ways. And so that chaos spinning in Bangladesh is also going to spread. I think that, what the prime minister is trying to do is she's trying to run a civil society, and she's trying to run a civil government. As it was said earlier, using, they use the Westminster model. The England was involved in Bangladesh going back to, the early 19th century. It was among the first railroads in the subcontinent were in Bangladesh that the British put there with their schools and everything else. And so what you have, though, is you have this civil society, and then, in opposition always in every country, in every society, there is the tribal or feudal forces that don't want the individuals to be voting, right? The democracy, as we understand it, empowers individuals to vote and make individual choices, and then that collective comes up with a result. But there are feudal or tribal forces that want to collect all those individuals into a group. And in the United States, we call them labor unions. In the United States, we call it the Democratic Party. In the United States, we call it Black Lives Matter. Whatever you want to call it. But whenever you have this sort of group or identity politics that doesn't focus on the individual, that's going to be in opposition with pure politics. I think that Hassana has had a remarkable run, and you're seeing that some of the same you see some of the same characters who were in the Biden administration, where it's now working with the Obama administration. The Biden administration was intent on destabilizing her and her regime. We saw it in the machinations when the Biden administration disrupted support from the World Bank. And now you're seeing it now with people who are in the Biden administration or associated with the Biden administration. I think not the least of which is Governor Andrew Cuomo's ex-wife, Kerry Kennedy, the daughter of the late Senator Robert F. Kennedy, sort of fulminating and fomenting and creating this impression that the election going on January 7th is somehow anti-democratic or evidence or proof of a lack of democracy. And these they say these absurd things and just expect to roll with it. It's so I'm very concerned. I think that what happens on January 7th is going to have an effect that beyond Bangladesh. So obviously, for Bangladeshi reasons, you want to have a good election, you want to have a solid government, you want to be able to move forward, but you also have implications for what the Americans call the Indo-Pacific theater.
You're so absolutely astute and spot on with that. I think we just may have lost Neil, his connection. He'll be coming back in a second, but I just want to point out that what Neil is saying is so accurate. It's something that I've noticed as well. There is, I don't know if everyone here is familiar with it, but there was an individual who also held a press conference in Dhaka, actually claiming to be an advisor to President Biden. I forgot his name. It slips my mind at the moment, but he did a very, very interesting job at making people believe that he actually advised the President of the United States and gave a false, there was a false report that a State Department official had given Prime Minister Hasina until November 1st, I think it was, to vacate her office as Prime Minister. Absolutely ludicrous. That was, of course, shut down by an official response from the State Department that a journalist from India, actually, who is also living in the US, Rohit Sharma, covered. And so it's amazing to me the amount of misinformation and frankly, just because a party has the Democratic Party on it doesn't always mean that it is truly trying to advance human rights across the globe. That's why it's so important to do your investigative research, like of course and what I'm going to do is, I know we have many more people who are joining us. Apologies, but wonderful. I'm so glad that we have so many people here who are joining us. I wanted to, speaking about the national security aspects, just go back for a second to also what Neil said, and to go to Geoffrey and to everyone else as well, regarding how he said, Pakistan is China. There is no doubt that there is a very strong economic relationship between China and Bangladesh. Here, Neil is back with us now. There is a very strong correlation and partnership. China's presence and strength on the global market cannot be ignored. It's had its own ups and downs. And of course, we see India also rising, and Africa, frankly, Bangladesh, as strong economic powers through the garment industry in Bangladesh in particular, and other burgeoning economies. I want to talk a little bit about the national, how basically the national security implications, Geoffrey, of having through the US, China, India. I'm just going to go ahead and mute. I'm sorry, everyone. Just give me 1 second here. Oh, We are good. We are good. If everyone anyone who's joining us, welcome. We're so pleased to have you here with us this evening, this afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. But if you could please mute yourselves, that'll be wonderful. And I just want to ask you, Jeff, how has, among the strategic competition that's occurring, right? Economically, geopolitically, national security wise, amongst powers such as the US, China, and Russia, right? How does Bangladesh fit into that equation? And what is, I guess, how are they vying? We've seen how India has handled the Russia-Ukraine crisis, Russia-US crisis, if you want to talk about it, and then other global issues. But how has Bangladesh kind of worked on balancing those competitors and the global powers?
Well, the first thing I'd say is that we live in a more transactional world. And I think the Western democracies, it's taken them a while to sort of wake up to this. I mean, we might have imagined some years ago that everyone wanted to emulate us, and they all wanted to have our sort of model of democracy, however you define that. But that's not the world that we live in today. We do live in a multipolar world, and there is competition now, even for many of the smaller states, and for the emerging economies, for a whole variety of reasons. All of the powers are engaged in that competition. And I would say that India is, of course, an increasingly important strategic consideration. Very soon, India will be the world's third largest economic power. She already has considerable military power. Mainly regional, but increasingly wider capabilities. So India is the key. So we have to ask ourselves, we want to keep India on board. We want to keep India and the West as one. But of course, India sees herself very much as an independent player in this world, and she has many cross-cutting relationships. Often very uncomfortable ones as far as we're concerned. Now, what about India and Bangladesh? That seems to me to be the key. The Indian government has made it very clear they're very supportive of Sheikh Hasina. They want her to continue in power. They're very comfortable with that. They give her every possible support. She was invited, if you remember, to the G20 meeting by Modi. She's had many visits to India. She had a state visit there in September. He's very concerned about India's neighborhood. And of course, Bangladesh is a key part of that. Bangladesh is India's key leading South Asian economic power or economic partner. Bangladesh, of course, gives India easier access to those parts of India, the remote parts in the northeast. So very important from that point of view. India is very, very concerned and conscious of China's ambitions in that part of the world, not just in Myanmar, but also if we look up to the Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh, which China is claiming for herself. That whole area is one of great concern for India, and she wants to make sure she remains the key power that's influencing that region. But China, of course, now, in terms of economic terms, has a far bigger trading relationship with Bangladesh than India does. We've also seen she's the biggest defense supplier of Bangladesh. We've seen these developments in Chittagong, which some would characterize as part of China's sort of string of pearls strategy. All of these things are very worrying for India. Wants to see, therefore, a stable government in Bangladesh. She wants regional security. She wants a government in Bangladesh that she can rely on and knows is going to be a good friend.
I think that's absolutely true. What does everyone else think? our two guests who are in Bangladesh and in Delhi, Dhaka and Delhi?
Well, I think a couple of points. One point, I think when it comes to China, Bangladesh has been very clear that our relationship with China is based on economic merit and not on security merit. One is our foreign policy principle is a unique one, as you know, friendship towards all, malice towards none. And that was established before Bangladesh came to being. It was first mooted out in the Awami League's election manifesto in 1970 when we were part of Pakistan. And when Pakistan was part of CENTO and SEATO, I think Bangabandhu had the courage to come up and say that we will not be part of any military alliance. And today, even as we speak, it has remained true to that particular understanding that friendship towards all, malice towards none. So our relationship with all the countries has been on the merit, on the economic merit, on the issue of development, which allows for a win-win situation. Some of the infrastructure development that has taken place in Bangladesh, even there are Chinese input there, but it would benefit everyone. There are Japanese input there, but it would benefit everyone. Even the big bridge that everybody talks about, which World Bank did not provide the money, but later on Bangladesh Prime Minister decided to build with own money, and of course the technical support came from China. But that bridge is also going to help India and also United States, because the cost of transport would go down, particularly on the RMG sector. And in that way, it would help other countries as well. So our relationship with China or with India or any other country has always been on the basis of economic partnership and not on security partnership. There we have always shied away. Historically, we have shied away to be part of any military alliance, and I think that is something Bangladesh will continue to keep even beyond January 7th election.
Can I supplement here, if you allow?
Sure.
What China is not as keen in Bangladesh. India is the trusted friend, and historically, India is the closest neighbor. You can never change your neighbor. Moreover, in 1971, soldiers of both the countries shedded their blood in the same soil. China is known as Chin, and Sheikh Hasina is actually striking a balance between China and Bangladesh. India is our trusted friend, security and other aspects. China is actually the construction partners, if you say the development perspective. So we said this is a Chindia policy, Chin as China and India, Chindia policy of Sheikh Hasina. And, economic stability is required in Bangladesh, and stability translating into economic disruption can hamper important trade relations, production process, and even with India, that would actually adversely affect the integrated supply chain in the entire South Asian region. So the economic partnership with China, the historic traditional partnership with India, and also the partnership with America and European nations, these are all required for Bangladesh. And Bangladesh is required by the Westerners as well as the regional players.
Thank you. Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, I feel that India, India's neighborhood policy that Prime Minister Modi has been following after he came to the power, in that neighborhood policy, neighborhood first, Bangladesh, India considers to be the closest friend, because India no longer even holds dialogue with Pakistan. So Bangladesh is the one of the trusted and closest friends in South Asia. But the reality is also different, that China is all around. Whatever India used to consider as its sphere of influence is no longer there. So like Nepal in China is already present in a major way. Bhutan recently started speaking out quite openly that they want to deal with China. Now Bangladesh is also dealing quite openly with China. The thing is that Bangladesh does not want to rely completely on India, and they see an economic opportunities when China comes with lots of money and also gives security, defense materials. So for Bangladesh, it serves the purpose. And, you know, India, despite the fact also remains that India being the closest ally of Bangladesh, India is also not among the people in Bangladesh. I have this understanding that India is no longer a favorite nation in Bangladesh. It's because of its action, because the way the polity is evolving in India. So there's also things are moving in a different way in Bangladesh. We have to be realistic in the assessment why Sheikh Hasina also wants to have an open alliance with China. And there are, in India, there is a concern that probably she might join this Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, that the RCEP, which China offers. And that worries India. But you never know the way things are moving. And for Bangladesh, India is always a double-edged sword. It wants to deal with India, but at the same time, it wants to maintain distance because the domestic politics does not allow an open hobnobbing with India and open. No political party in Bangladesh can say that India it's being supported by India. So this is also reality in Bangladesh. So in that situation, you have to see how things are evolving in Bangladesh. Plus, China comes as a counter to the USA. The USA in Bangladesh has never trusted USA since 1971. The USA's stand when Bangladesh was seeking independence really harmed Bangladesh that time a lot, and it cost that nation millions of people. Had the US behaved differently, probably not so many lives would have been lost in Bangladesh as they were lost in 1971. So there is an inbuilt, very inherent distrust between Bangladesh and the USA. And this persists. China comes as a backup for Bangladesh, but that does not mean that Bangladesh will sever its ties with the USA. But yes, China comes as a backup, as a good supporter, and then of course Russia is also coming up. Russia is also has opened its account in Bangladesh. For the first time, they are dealing openly, and now Russia is supporting Bangladesh in establishing nuclear plants there. They are supporting over $20 billion Russia is giving. So Bangladesh is enjoying its strategic position there. But at the same time, the way things are democratically, that country is evolving. It's a matter of concern because if the people does not take interest in elections, if people loses trust in democracy, it's not good for that nation. So Bangladesh has to really watch how it's going to evolve. And I think democracy has to be really sustainable there. It has to have the trust of the people, which it does not enjoy right now. And only then it will serve all the claimants, all the geopolitical players there.
Thank you. I have to reference a pretty popular, I think, US comedian, Kevin Hart, who I think is quite firmly on the left, if I'm not mistaken, Democrat, vocal Democrat. But when it came to an incident, I think it was when Donald Trump was president, he was asked, I think it was by the media, whether or not he would ban or bar any Trump supporters from attending his comedy shows. And I don't know his exact quote, but I believe it was something along the lines of business is business. Republican or Democrat, at the end of the day, everyone uses money, and I'm not going to stop anyone from coming in and letting business occur as usual. And I think that's a common underlying theme with every nation, frankly, regardless of their political, affiliations, their leniencies. For better or for worse, there is a definite marriage and a relationship between the tendency for war and conflict, for being a unfortunate generator of wealth. And that's something that I personally am working towards, hopefully, finding an alternative to kind of to stop that. It's a long task, and I welcome any of you if you're interested in joining me on this journey. But that said, I think that's why, regardless of what the political and geopolitical turn of events are over the coming and ensuing years, and whichever administrations, whether in the US, in Bangladesh, in India, China, there will always be the maintenance of a relation when it comes to the economic ties. And of course, Bangladesh can certainly attribute its wonderful development to China's contributions, as well as other countries. So yes, you keep your friends close, and your economic alliances closer. We'll say it that way. I just want to turn, with everyone's permission, to a question from an esteemed journalist from the audience, Rohit Sharma. There is a question here, if you're open to answering it. The US has raised concerns about the elections in Bangladesh, especially when it comes to the BNP boycotting the upcoming elections, given the patchy association of the BNP, Bangladesh National Party, with Islamist organization Jamaat-e-Islami. Do you think the US has done a shoddy job of making the general public aware of challenges if the BNP were to ever come to power again? Because they were in power under the leadership of Khaleda Zia for a few years before losing power when Prime Minister Hasina came into the mantle again of power. I would love to open that up to the audience to respond to that, because the election's a few days away.
Let me just say quick, Adele, that the U.S. government and its associates portraying Hasina as a dictator, as someone who's a tyrant, who's basically running crooked elections, that's arresting opposition leaders and this sort of thing, is patently absurd. Not only, you think about her own personal history, the way her father was killed, what her family has suffered. It's 19 or 20 assassination attempts, her own time in prison, her own time in opposition, and she brings this personal story, which everyone in Bangladesh knows. And so you talk about this woman as if she's Stalin, but the people in Bangladesh know that she's not Stalin. But yet the American government thinks if you call someone Stalin, then everyone will just roll. And I think we talked about earlier with the 1 million refugees that were taken in by Burma. This is not the act of a Stalin. This is a humanitarian act, which I don't even know what the factor would be if a similar number of refugees were taken in by the United States. 1 million refugees from Burma, not even considering the complications with the military junta in Burma and everything that was going on. Yet she went ahead and did it. Or if you look at the result of the Bangladesh Rifles, where the Bangladeshi army insisted that she use harsh immediate military action to put down the mutiny, and she tapped the brakes, and she's like, actually, I'm not going to just rush in there. And dozens of people were killed. It was a terrible situation, but it could have been a lot worse, and it could have erupted into something, maybe even a civil war, if she had misplayed it. Certainly, there are other world leaders in history who have misplayed similar instances that have exploded. And so I really resent, and I'm frustrated by the attitude of the American government towards Sheikh Hasina and her approach. And I'm speaking as an outsider, but so is the United States government. They're behaving as outsiders without any touch for the reality on the ground.
Thank you for that. So, would anyone else like to respond?
Well, just to say, I mean, I very much agree with David's analysis there. I think we're far too admonitory in the West as far as many governments are concerned. We are not fully in touch with a lot of the sentiments on the ground, but more important, I believe we live in an age when realpolitik is coming back. And this moralizing that goes on the part of the West, all it's doing is losing its friends. And we live in this dangerous and challenging world, and we need to ask ourselves, who's more likely to be well disposed towards the West? Is it A or is it B? Now, I don't have any dog in this particular fight, but it seems to me that Sheikh Hasina, she has strong connections with the West. Remember, she spent 5 years in exile living in the United States. She spent time in the United Kingdom. The UK and the US have been very good friends of Bangladesh, and I think she recognizes that. India wants her in power still. All these things are the realities that we need to recognize. So we shouldn't just become spokesmen for some particular noisy group that happens to be in opposition or whatever at the moment. So we live in the real world. Let's remember that, and it's a dangerous world, and we all need friends.
It's a wonderful and very strong analysis.
I'll differ here. I'll say that's the concern that the US raises in Bangladesh, that the concern about democracy is genuine. The kind of if the opposition does not participate in an election, and if your own supporters are not interested in voting, talk to the people at the ground today. I was speaking to the civil society journalists. Even the supporters of Awami League, traditional supporters, they are not keen to vote. They know that the result is this is going to be the result, then why to vote? When people start thinking that way, when you have the largest opposition party, which continuously got more than 30% of the vote share, they don't participate in a general election. It's a matter of concern. Of course, I will not support the US's interference in Bangladesh's internal politics, but Bangladesh itself needs to address this anomaly that has come, and if it's not addressed, it's going to be more chaotic, because knowing Bangladesh's history, it's not going to be very smooth affairs. Even Sheikh Hasina wins more than say all the 300 parliamentary seats. So that's why the concern is genuine, but how to address it is a different thing.
Well, we might not like it, but whoever comes to power in Bangladesh, if we look back over its fairly young history, whoever's in power, they take some measures to suppress the opposition. We've seen that whoever's been in power over succeeding sort of combinations. And the fact is that Sheikh Hasina, I mean, she's coming, this is her fifth election. And so she has a lot of popularity and a lot of support. So we need to recognize that.
I just want to jump in here, and I know I'm out of turn, but we have to remember too that in the United States, the opposition leader to the current regime has 90 plus indictments and charges. He's got to manage at least 4 different criminal trials in 4 different locations. The U.S. government has been admonished by a federal judge where there are something like 36 Biden administration officials that were named by a judge that they were told they were no longer allowed to contact social media and media outlets to suppress opposition speech. And so it's very rich if someone from the Biden administration complains about democracy or suppression of opposition in Bangladesh, when you consider what's going on in this political cycle is absolutely unprecedented in the United States.
If I may also add, I've noticed this, and I'm certain everyone here may have seen the same. It's so easy to hate on those who are in power. It's so easy to find issues to cling on to and to find flaws. And being in the media myself, trust me, I do know all too well how everyone's watching for the slightest little error or something that differs from their own view. And one thing that I think we'll all agree with here is that we are not fans. All of us here are very strong individuals who are not fans of the victim mentality, strong people. And the victim card has all too often been played as a way to appeal to people's emotional weaknesses, instabilities. And it's something that is done very often by the opposition to address, to be frank with you. Also, one last thing about it's come up several times. Again, I want to emphasize from what has been verbally expressed, what has been the position of the current leadership. There have been calls for open, free elections, welcoming the opposition and other parties to participate in these elections. And it was, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink. At the end of the day, there's the invitation to run against the leading party, and you can't drag them to the ballots, right? But if they do so choose to participate, wonderful. But to utilize that as a way to manipulate public perception and to potentially further destabilize, let's say, a situation in the country is a very selfish motive. And so I certainly hope that once January 7th elections come and go, they will be peaceful, and that all those who are participating will have the ability to express their, positions, which they will, I'm sure, in a free and effective manner. And that by the time the next elections roll around, if there are any parties that do wish to see a change in, let's say, leadership, that they do actually take up the mantle of leadership themselves and take the first step, which is to actually participate and not to boycott an election, to which they have been invited to participate.
I just want to add here, if I may.
Please.
Yeah, two things. The merit of of the boycott, if we can limit that, and the argument is that the opposition parties, or the main opposition party, wants the caretaker government, and that has been the argument. Now, if you look at the there is a myth, the caretaker government could give elections which are less violent, which is not the case. I think Ishtiaque also tried to point out. In 2001, we had a caretaker government, but more than 150 people died during that election, much less than elections held under regimes. But more importantly, and this is something I want to flag for all of you to understand, what happens with the parliament that comes through caretaker government. And we had several parliaments which came through caretaker government election. The number of boycotts in the parliament in the first caretaker government was 34%. But in the last parliament where the caretaker government was involved, the boycott was 84%, over 84%, nearly 85% boycott of all the sessions by the opposition party. So if that is the case, it doesn't really help. That's the point. And that's the reason I was pointing out, the reason for BNP. It seems that there's a crisis in leadership. The first two leaders coming from the same family, whether they would be able to participate in the election or not. And I think they probably bargain on that quite a lot. But it seems that it's a legal issue. And I think that has become a problem, because if a third leader comes out, the chances are that the whole party may go beyond the family-cracy that we talk about. So I think there are certain structural problems here. So it's a complex one, no doubt, for why they are, why they refuse to participate. Because in any election with all the faults, participation allows you to at least engage with the people. So why suddenly you choose not to participate? And when you see millions of people are not coming out on the streets, because that is how, in Bangladesh politics, whatever transformation and whatever democracy has come is through millions of people coming out on the streets. So when you don't see that, why don't you participate and engage with the people? So I think the issues are interesting, and I'm sure Bangladesh will find a way to resolve their political, whatever the stability. And I pointed out that we never had political stability, and this is what Bangladesh is all about. So I'm quite confident that even with all the limitations, but the only problem we have, at least from my standpoint, is when outsiders come to give lessons or give when they speak, they actually create more problems for Bangladesh, because then the polarization gets deeper. And there, I think the United States, if they understand Bangladesh well, I think they can invest on how to minimize the distrust. But that is not where they are putting their investments. Rather, whatever they have been doing, at least for the last 2 years or 1.5 years, is deepening the polarization, and that is worrisome, because it creates also anti-Americanism, which is not required, because historically, and I pointed out to Peter, to our U.S. ambassador here, in one of the discussion, that earlier in our history, we had anti-Americanism from the left. There was a serious left movement which had this anti-Americanism, and then at one point in time it became from the right. If you remember the Taliban phase and all, from the right Islamic forces. But now, for no good reason, you're building within the liberal forces, because Awami League, with all its limitations, belongs neither to the left nor to the right. They're in the middle. And to impose sanctions and to talk about ways of dealing with things, one of the panelists said, becoming spokesperson of the opposition party. This really tells you that things can really become something which is not required. So I think there should be more trust on the people of Bangladesh, that Bangladeshis know what to do. When they would want to change things, they would want, they will. There's no doubt about it. Historically, we have seen that. And so if other countries can put some trust on our people, I think our democracy in the long term will evolve in a way which probably would help a lot of people who would want democracy in our country or elsewhere.
Thank you so much. I'd just like to add that I think what everyone is saying here, there has been a crisis of confidence and inconfidence around the globe. It's not just in the countries that everyone is hailing from, it's everywhere. And so I think the next steps are really going directly to the people, as I believe Prime Minister Hasina is doing, as I believe every country's leadership is attempting to do, and to be able to restore that confidence again. And I have no doubt that it is going to be a reality. And I want to just take a moment now and to thank all of our esteemed panelists here for taking the time out of their busy schedules, evening and afternoon, in Europe, in Bangladesh, in America, in India, and anyone who's joining us from all over the world. Thank you. And
thank you,
everyone. Thank you so much. Please, everyone, make sure that you are paying attention. January 7th, this Sunday, is the historic election in Bangladesh, and we are looking forward to having another conversation in about 3 weeks' time in the follow-up to this election, this historic election, and look forward to seeing all of you back again. I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your week, and we will, on behalf of the Gold Institute for International Strategy, thank you, and we will see you very soon.